Do you feel that you can break the mold? We've all been at the races when a horse has been backed off the boards, and we'll speak to a trainer or an owner and say, what's happened here? This horse has been punted from 33-1 to 7-4 favourite, and the first thing they tell you is, I don't know where that's come from. I'm not saying that they always know where that's come from.
They all know where it's come from. This sport right now has a lot of issues. We'd spoken for a long time, and Frankie was quite getting a bit tired from racing, but he didn't know what he was going to do next. He didn't want to take your jobs, so
he would have. If he wanted.
He would have taken your jobs, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you guys?
Hello. A special guest.
How are you?
Hey.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Welcome. Welcome.
Nice journey
Thank
here. Easy?
Going through London is never nice,
Yeah.
Now we're in
A man of your import ought to fly over London, shouldn't you?
No, definitely
There
not.
must be a helipad over there.
There is no
Big
helicopter.
ammo racing on it.
Yeah, no helicopters for me.
Where were you
No,
today?
I'm not a helicopter fan.
Where were you today?
St John's Wood, North London.
Right.
Yeah, so I came from the office.
Great.
Yeah, but no,
Close
I'm not
to
a
Lord's.
helicopter fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, right close to Lord's. Yeah, we're not far from Lord's actually. We're about 5-6 minutes away from Lords,
Oh, lovely.
which is great, except
always
for
my-
when the cricket is on, and then you've got it takes you like 30 minutes to get to like a
Anyway.
5-minute walk. Yeah.
It's always my dream to have a flat in St John's Wood, just close to the cricket ground.
Overlooking the ground.
And then I realised that I wouldn't be able to afford it. So my young dreams were that here. So we know you predominantly now in racing, of course.
Yeah.
Making a big splash in racing, but obviously you did that in football, and those watching will know you, by and large, as a football agent. How did all that start for you? Just take us back. How did you get into that?
Well, I was in investment banking really, and then I was looking at media and sports projects, and one of the media and sports projects actually was, we were actually having a look at Granada back in 2005. We were, I was a sort of a younger junior guy on the team, and they were looking
That's
at...
Lord Allen. He's his history. The new man in charge of the BHA. He was involved with Granada back in the day.
Yeah, it's a great story because we then reached out to investors. We were looking at Granada, and Granada had a share of Arsenal that they were selling at the time. David Dean and the majority owner who passed away, Danny Fitzman, were pushing me to say go and buy this small stake of Arsenal. And I went back to the board and they said 400 million valuation is way too much. So
Hang on. So what year was this?
that was 2005.
What would
So
that
that's just after Invincible's era, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
that
is
was
that
after.
what would that 400 million be worth now?
Oh, I mean, I think, Arsenal obviously would be hard to buy now because it's owned by the Cronkies and they've created one of the best sports franchises in the world with the LA Rams, and they've owned the basketball team, they own MLS team. So, but you would say if Man United traded at approximately 6.5 billion, Arsenal should trade somewhere in the 4s.
Yeah.
But then I'm a little bit biased, being an Arsenal fan.
Oh, you're an Arsenal fan. Good
So
man.
I'm a little
Good
bit
man.
biased.
I always knew there was something I didn't like here.
Even Tottenham fans.
Yeah, so he's a Tottenham fan. Yeah.
Could just take me back then? Could you have any kind of idea back then that football would go the way financially that it has? Could you, or has it risen beyond even your wildest dreams at the time?
Well, to be honest, at the time, my focus was media and sports was really something that we saw had a huge, growth potential. It's just that at that time, people were not really concentrating on sports. They were looking at sports more like okay, this is sort of like a rich man's toy rather than a really professional business. And you've seen now the model has completely changed. I mean, NFL, they say yesterday I read an article, the biggest franchise in NFL is probably the Dallas Cowboys right now, at just under 14 billion valuation. And that wouldn't, if you think that the NFL is worth something around 14 billion on the biggest franchise, football is still a long, long way away. And it's not far-fetched to look at what's happened in the sport. A lot of American funds, investors, big corporations have pumped money into the sport knowing that there is plenty of room for growth. You look at football, you look at the Premier League, and probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have found, the only American really were the Glazers. They were the first to get in. And at the time, I don't remember exactly the number they paid, but I remember there was a PIK debt on it at a very high rate, and it was somewhere in the 16%. And they had about 350 or 400 million on that debt, which was on their accounts. It was verified on the accounts, and people were writing about it. I think it might have sold around 600, 700 million at the time, and now it's worth 6.5 billion, and there's still plenty of room for growth. And when they announced that they were going to sell a part of it, you had two predominantly very strong bidders in Sheikh Jassim from Qatar and Ratcliffe, and you probably would have had more bidders if it was an completely open sale. So yes, I do think so. I think Chelsea was another very big sort of transaction that occurred, probably undervalued because of the circumstances of the Abramovich being forced to sell rather than that. So probably that was a very good deal.
I think the most famous deal you were probably involved with early on in your, well, I say early on, you've been doing it a while, but it's 20 years ago now, the TEVEZ Mascherano deal.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was kind of mad. It was a bit disruptive. Can you just take us back to that? Was that your most memorable deal as a football agent?
No, not really memorable deal. I mean, I thought Felipe Coutinho was a very, very big deal.
That was the biggest money, wasn't it?
Was the biggest
money
deal.
to Barcelona.
That's been a good deal. But there's been a lot of very good deals, important deals. I think the most memorable deals are the ones that you sort of get investment at a very low number, and then you see that growth. I mean, recently Omari Hutchinson went from Arsenal to Chelsea at 2.5 million, and then went to Ipswich for 20, to Nottingham Forest for 37.5, and you can see that is a boy that's going to grow even further. I mean, that is sort of very satisfying when you take a very young player at that age and you see that, growth. And Xerxes was another one. I know he hasn't yet quite taken off at United, but he is a very talented player who will take off. But Mascherano and TEVEZ obviously go back historically because it was a different way of doing business.
Well, no one really knew what the deal was.
In the Premier League. But it's very common outside. And actually there was a lot of transactions in the Premier League that had been done that way, but none of them had been disclosed before. And so when we came in, we disclosed it, and it created this huge, what are they doing? But it was like any other investment type of project. You're investing in player transactions. So a lot of banks today have started lending money on player transactions and saying, okay, if you are owed X amount of money by, let's say, Arsenal buy a player from Sporting Lisbon, and then Sporting Lisbon wants to discount that money. Banks now come into it and discount that money. In a way, we were acting as an investment vehicle that was saying, okay, you can't afford to buy these high quality players, but we will actually invest. So rather than being on the side of the receivable where you're basically discounting the money for Arsenal, we're actually giving you the opportunity to buy these players and pay us in installments once you can afford to do so. And at the time, we came out and we declared it. We hadn't done anything wrong, and we were never, then it was all very above board, and Man United then took over TEVEZ's contract, and Liverpool took over Mascherano's contract, which on the same exact basis. But unfortunately, I think, West Ham hadn't declared it, and because we declared it, then it created a little bit of a more hysteria than probably
still saved West Ham's arse anyway, because they stayed up, right? So ultimately
they've managed to stay up for so long, and they've done they've managed to keep themselves stable.
Are you a god at West Ham then?
No.
When you go there,
no.
Bowing down.
I think that warrants for the players and the guys that really sort of do the work. The players were unbelievable that year, and TEVEZ was, to his credit, he's always been that kind of a character.
Terrier.
He's a huge fighter, and he had an opportunity to leave in January, and he said, "I'm not leaving." And even though he wasn't playing, and there's a great little story where one particular West Ham manager called him from the sideline and said, "Listen, I've got to put you on because basically the whole crowd is just calling your name, but I actually don't know what position you're going to play." So, and he was on the touchline, and there was a translator translating, and so the translator says this to Tevez, and Tevez says to him, "Tell the manager to go, stuff himself in a more unpolite Argentinian manner." And then the manager says, "You know what? Just go there and just play whichever position." Anyway, he came on, and I won't say the result, but he did very well, because if I say the result, you'll know which manager.
I'm racking my brains. I'm trying to get back.
Yeah, he scored, and then he scored, and he jumped in the crowd. So that, and then after that, it became a very, he became iconic, and he does deserve that, because he's that kind of player. He came to Corinthians from Argentina, being an Argentinian, coming to Brazil, and Brazil and Argentina have got a huge rivalry in football, and he became this sort of godlike figure in Corinthians, the largest football team in Brazil, along with Flamengo. And there were statues of him, there were figures, and people were even shouting Argentina in a Brazilian stadium. So he's got that aura about him. He did the same thing at United, he did the same thing at Juventus, and when he went back to Boca, and even as a manager now, he's got that similar. Yeah, he's a manager now, and he's got that similar trait.
Wicked.
As Mascherano's managing too. He's managing Inter Miami.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he's there with
Beckham.
Messi and Beckham.
Do you still represent them?
No, I don't represent them. We try to stay away from representing managers.
Did you ever deal with Beckham when he was playing?
Not deal with him in terms of as a player, but spoke to him. Speak to him.
Fergie, you would have come across him. He loved
Fergie,
racing.
absolutely. Fergie and I've had our moments.
Hairdryer treatment with Fergie.
Yeah. I've been on the back end of a hairdryer treatment of Fergie.
What happened?
It was about Tevez, really. I mean, at the time, because he'd had a couple of chances to sign Tevez, and we had actually given him a real good opportunity to sign him. So the first window, he decided to go for Berbatov, not sign Tevez, and then the second window, something else happened, and third window, something else happened. By the fourth window, I said, "Listen, we give up. We're going." And there was that famous scene where Tevez ran on the pitch and scored the goal, and then did that with his ears, and the crowd was singing, "Fergie, Fergie, sign him up." And and after that, I just sent a message to David, and I said, "What are you guys going to do?" He goes, "No, we're going to sign him. We're going to sign him." I said, "Well, we got 2 weeks," and was a champion. Then they were going to the Champions League final against Barcelona and Rome, and I said, we got to do something before, otherwise we're gone. And then they didn't do it, and then we were gone, and we ended up at City, and Fergie was not best pleased.
I remember this, because it was, and I remember it still sort of it did play out in the press. It's not like anything because there was always that narrative of why haven't they signed him, and then of course he ended up on the other side.
Would he have given you he would have let you know what he thought about that?
Fergie and I actually never spoke about it, but he sent messages because we have a lot of friends in common, as it happens, especially because of the racing world.
Yeah.
We had a lot of good friends in common, and he'd always mentioned in that world, "Oh, this guy." But it wasn't really my fault. I mean, it was, in actual fact, it was his own fault, because he should have signed him when Berbatov was, when he was going to sign Berbatov, and subsequently, he had 3-4 chances to sign him. We hadn't actually done anything wrong, but Fergie was one rule, and that was it.
Rule.
Yeah, and that was it. But because we have a lot of racing friends in common, because he's in the racing world, and so am I, and we have a very, very good friend in common, a Greek guy who's been both of our friends. It made it a little bit more interesting.
So how far back does your racing love involvement go?
Well, I've owned horses since 2004.
Okay.
Well,
what made you buy horses for the first time? What?
It was, my group of friends, basically. I had a group of elderly friends who are considerably older than me, and they were passionate about horses, and they, they had a lot of racehorses. Actually, one of them, he'll probably kill me now for saying he's considerably older, but Peter Wani was was one of them. He was one of those guys, and Satiris was another guy, and also in the football world, all the managers, were in the racing, like Harry's and Fergie's and everyone. So we started following a bit of racing, and I bought my first horse, which was a stitch up. But anyway, I got stitched up, which was fine.
Get used to it.
I got used to it, and probably the people thought, this guy's just a young little kid that's buying a horse. And at the time, it was for 40 grand. It was very expensive. For me, it was a huge number, and I ended up buying it, and I was so excited. And the guy who sold it to me, a very famous trainer, did a very nice stitch up, and I've never forgiven him for that. But and I'll get my own back on him. But and I have done a couple of times, and I will continue to. I'm not keeping score, but I just think that I think that's the problem. I think the problem wasn't that I got stitched up. The problem was that I don't think it's a way to bring young people into the sport.
Yeah.
Don't bring young people into sport who don't have knowledge and understanding, and bring them in and stitch them up. That's just a way of saying, nine out of 10 of them will just go, you know what, forget that. That's all crooked.
Bad experience.
And they leave. And I think that's the thing. That's the sad part of it. Now, in my case, it had the reverse effect. Right. I said, what, like, this guy's done that, I'm not gonna stitch up. And then I had a nice little run with we bought some horses with Jamie Osborne. We had a nice little run there, and we won a few races. And Jamie's quite fun to have a horse with, to say the least. He's quite fun. I learnt a different side of the game. And then we moved on from there to, we had a wonderful man called Rod Millman, fantastic trainer, just too far for me to go and see the horses. And at the time I was sort of starting my career in football and finance, etc. So it was very far for me to go because he was quite far away. And that was when I moved to Mike Bell and David Simcock, which was sort of Newmarket.
I'm glad he wasn't the one that stitched you up.
And I
This would be awkward.
What's that?
I'm glad he wasn't the one that stitched
Who,
you
Michael?
up. Yeah, this would be awkward if it
Michael
was.
stitches me up every day, but it's okay. We know each other.
Just with a smile.
We do it with a smile.
Yeah, it's a Bell trait.
It's a Bell trait. No,
But
I've had a
you've
wonderful
actually been with
experience.
him throughout, really, haven't you? Him and David Simcock, you've been with forever, essentially.
Yeah, him and David have been incredible guys. They are incredible guys, and they are, and we've had a lot of fun. I've had my battles with both, and I sometimes call Dave Slow Dave because he takes him so long to get the horses out, but he kind of likes to trade.
It's good to hear that. I will definitely use that on Dave.
Yeah, Slow Dave. Yeah. But now I said to him, this year we've given him some faster 2-year-olds. I said, no more slow horses for you. Like, we're not going with the long distances. We need you to get some 2-year-olds back. But, he's actually had a tremendous success with 2-year-olds as well. I mean, and he's had champion 2-year-old.
Yeah.
He's done well with it.
Dream ahead.
A dream ahead.
Frankel's
Exactly. 2-year-olds there.
Exactly. It's just that I guess, over the last few years, he's just bought a different type, which he likes, those staying horses. He loves them.
Sorry.
How do you think, I'm interested in how you think ammo racing is perceived. I mean, how would...
Well, it's gone from buying £40,000 horses to now spending
40 million
on
yearlings, yeah. But what do I think? So it's probably changing now, but I think people at the start would have definitely said, when ammo was coming in and starting to spend money, would have said, I'm going to say, do they? But ultimately, it's you, and people say, does this guy actually know what he's doing and what he's spending money on?
Why is he doing it?
Why is he doing it? Is he here to stay and for the long term? And I guess in the fullness of time, what we've seen is there's an answer to yes to those questions. But what was your sort of, or did you care at first as to what people perceived of you?
I think the thing is that when you are in sport, no matter what sport you're in, if you're in football or you're in a sport that is very public and very, in the public domain, especially, you got TV, newspapers, everything, you're always going to get criticized because there is no science to sport, right? Teams built for many, many years, Man United owners won the Champions League, but straight after that, they would get absolutely crucified with, glazer out walks, going through, the red, I forget what they were called, the red group that would, go through and try to get the team out, or in another stance with the Everton owner, Farhad Moshiri, who invested 400 million of his own money building a new stadium and did that, and he had, got backlash of that. And NFL right now, Dallas Cowboys that we spoke about, worth 14 billion, and he's built something incredible, but the fans are on a big backlash on him because his team is just not performing. Your team has to perform in sport for you to be considered okay, not good, okay. And if it performs badly, you are considered idiotic, if you're allowed to say that word.
I was cheering when Daniel Levy left Tottenham, even though he built a lovely new stadium, right? But that's it, because he's ultimately you're judged on results and how you conduct yourself.
Yeah, I was actually happy when Daniel was there, being an Arsenal fan. No, Daniel did a great job at Tottenham. He has done a great job at Tottenham. He built an unbelievable stadium. He built the training centre as, it's state of the art. You go to the training centre, you do get impressed. Unfortunately, also when you are at the top, you also have to balance your books. So you can't build a £2 billion stadium and yet invest 500 million in the team. It's one or the other. Now Arsenal, were extremely lucky with Arsene Wenger because, at the time, because Arsene had a big influence on building the new stadium and he was pushing for the new stadium and they did that. So that created a situation where the team suffered for 6-7 years under him because obviously this money had gone into building the stadium. The banks were getting repaid. There was not a huge cash flow going in. And so the team, people say that Arsenal hasn't won a trophy for a lot of years, but the team was in a huge transition period. And, you look at, like, for example, now what Edu and Mikel and the Cronkies have done in slow building that process, but building it the correct way so it has sustainability. The stadium is there, team is there. Same thing goes with us in Ammo, and I'm not comparing myself to Arsenal or Tottenham or any of those, but I'm just saying as a sport, it's going to take time. We were in a huge transition period. We went from 2017 where we were on a very tight budget buying, 20 yearlings or maybe 15 yearlings to 2020 buying, 60, 70, 80 yearlings. And
is that a conscious decision? I mean, obviously it's a conscious decision to buy those horses because you want to take on Coolmore, Godolphin, Juddmonte and Ammo to be considered in that sort of bracket, basically.
So I look at the sport as, this sport right now has a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And I reflect back on how football 15, 16, 18 years ago was and where it's come to today. And that has been a tremendous growth in compliance areas, in larger scales of betting, in how the transition has occurred to make the sport a better sport. I think right now racing is 15, 20 years behind other sports. And so do I see a value in racing as a sport? Yes, it is the second biggest sport in betting wise in the UK. Everyone loves racing, but we have got a problem. We can't get the crowds into the stands at the right, at every venue. We can only do it at certain venues like Royal Ascot or Breeders' Cups or something like that. And you could see last year where the Derby suffered so badly. But
massively.
Bad organization sometimes bad planning. And I think the sport has a tremendous future ahead of it. I think so many people love owning horses because it also gives you a sense of like you are part of that sport. You're making a decision with that sport. And that's one of the things that, one of the things that I did, and I got criticized for it a lot at the beginning, is, those arguments I had with trainers and those situations that I had with trainers was not arguments, but discussions or talks, is because, you want someone to come in and buy a horse for 40, 50, 60, 80, whatever the number is, it doesn't matter. $1 million or 20 grand, it makes really no difference. You want them to be a part of that. You want them to have a say. You want them to be able to talk to you. You want them to be able to talk to the jockey. You want to say, hey, I want to go to Sandown because it's 20 minutes from my house. I don't want to go to, Pontefract. And you want those owners to actually feel and live the sport so that they can actually get more encouraged to put more investment in. If you just buy a horse and don't ever hear about it again, you receive a text message from a trainer saying, your horse has been entered into this race, and then you're all sitting at home watching it, and the horse comes at the back of the telly, and then you get a 2-minute phone call from the trainer, and that's the end of that. The one thing that people have to realize is that the people that own the horse should have more involvement. It will give them a better feel.
But when you talk like that, you explain how things are from the owner's perspective. For a lot of people in racing, that's the general racing public, the race fan, they see someone like you as a newbie. They see you as the new guy. And because they're established people who've been involved in the sport for a long time, and you come up and you criticize a trainer, or you say you didn't like the method in which they go about communicating, whatever, you're seen as the villain.
That's fine. There has to be a villain to change things. You can't change it without being perceived as someone, as an agent. My hope is I'm pumping the finances in. We've got investors, really good investors, solid, very strong groups. And
is that Apollo?
Well, Apollo have given us, Apollo is one of our groups that have helped us fund it.
Because some people spoke about that. It's like a 40 million loan, and people are going,
it's 10.25% interest rate.
Yeah, it's not 10.25% interest rate, but it's a more complex deal. But what I've created is just sort of an investment group behind me that can actually support and have longevity. When we started the business, we said this is going to take 5-6 years.
Right.
Okay, this is not going to be tomorrow. We're not gonna so all of a sudden go out there buy 30-40 million pounds worth of yearlings, and then all of a sudden we're gonna be competing with Coolmore and Godolphin and Juddmonte and Windstar and Spendrift and Rispoli and whoever else that we're thinking about. But this is a long-term game. I mean, you think about Godolphin, how many years they've been in the sport, how much investment have gone through. Today they might have the greatest horse in America. That's 35 years.
Yeah.
And they won the Kentucky Derby 35 years later for the first time. It shows you how difficult the sport is.
Do they look at, because you're saying you're not spending 30-40 million, you're spending a lot of money at the sales, 4 million on a Frankel filly 2 years ago. Are they looking at it going, when that horse doesn't go on to be a star, like, why have you spent that money on? Are you being questioned in any of the decisions you make?
No. And we're not buying individual horses to have individual success. We look at this as a pool.
Right.
So we'll go out and, Arizona, who won the Group 1, who's now gone to the National Stud in Ireland and will be a stallion, he cost a fraction. He cost not even 10%, maybe 1% of what a Frankel cost. And Power Blue, who won our other Group 1 this year, who is remaining training, initially cost 44k. And
it's bloodlines you need as well, right?
It's bloodlines you need.
And you're also fully aware going to the sales that you're paying against the people you're bidding against. You're paying over the odds.
Yep.
Because they might own half.
Yep.
Already.
Yep.
So you're going You're dollar to dollar. You're effectively, you might be paying 25, 50% over the odds, and you're doing that. You're fully aware you're doing that, right? Because you want to get into those lines.
Correct.
To give yourself a footing in the breeding world going forward.
Correct. We bought several horses, not this year, year before, last year, at the sales when we first made our sort of the headlines were coming out, and we knew that there were other owners that owned 50% of that and full shares, and we broke the record on one Wootton Bassett that was owned. They already owned 50% of that horse before it went in the ring, and they may have done a deal to own the other 50%. So they may have been bidding very little to the dollar, but there is we knew in order for us to try to break the mold of what is going on, we put an investment figure together, and we said we'll go and buy what we want within this budget. Now, could be that your £4 million horse or your £3 million horse becomes a huge success, or it could be that your £100,000 horse becomes a huge success.
You look at it as a whole.
42. Yeah. You have to look at this as a whole. Yeah. You have to look at this as a team. You look at this. I am looking at it a little bit like the way other sports are structured. And you look at a football team, for example, Liverpool could spend, 100 and X million on Wirtz and another one on it, Isaac and so on and so on. But they could have one from their academy that pops up and is better than all of them, and the same thing can happen. I mean, Arsenal have spent quite a lot of money, but Saka, who came from their academy, is probably one of the best players on the team. So that in what you do is you look at the whole picture of the team and you say, this is my team. This is the whole group. Now, one of them will be a star. Yeah. One of them will not be a star. One of them will be average. One of them will be okay. It doesn't mean that just because you spent, the horses don't know how much they're worth, right? So he doesn't know he's worth 4 million and he's worth 40 grand.
You remember when you said the first trainer you had way back when?
Stitch Up trainer.
Do you feel that because you're coming in talking 20 million, 40 million, people's eyes light up and go, we can nick a bit here off this guy. We can slightly mug him off a bit.
Oh, that.
Does that happen?
100%. And the reason why I am there in all the sales and trying to do the hard work and try to, and my team of people is quite exceptional, really, because they are very much on the same wavelength. They are very much trying to figure out what's going on before the sales. We get a lot of clarity, but we're never ever going to get everything right. It's just not going to, we are going to get stitched up, and we know that, but it's to what limit of stitch up you can.
Well, I just want to pick up something you said just a couple of minutes ago, and I don't want you to stitch anybody else up, but you used the phrase, break the mold of what is going on. That's what you're trying to do with your team. There's been, for however long horse racing and sales have existed, there's always been an element of the sales being a place where you could get absolutely taken to the cleaners if you don't know what's going on. People who come into the sport go to the sales with a trainer or whatever, and they might think they've spent X amount of money. They have no idea exactly how that money's been divvied up by all sorts of parties. Do you feel that you can break the mold of what is going on? Do you think this is a realistic thing, or are you just trying to find a way for you and your team to win at it?
I think that it is extremely important for transparency. I think the sales companies are absolutely, sorry to say, useless at giving us transparency. And I think they need to be held more accountable of that particular situation. I think there is a bloodstock code of conduct, but no one's even heard of it. No one even looks at it. It's like buried in the BHA. Bloodstock agents owning percentages should be declared before they go in and buy. In fact, not just bloodstocks, owners like myself, we should not have, to use, any form or shape of different names or different situations or whatever in order to be able to buy and sell horses. It's absolutely normal. Godolphin do it quite straightforward. You go there and you see, this is a Godolphin horse. Why do you need to do those kinds of things? Now, sometimes do you have to get involved and do something like that because to avoid getting completely, stitched up? You shouldn't have to do that. It doesn't happen in football. It doesn't happen in NFL. It doesn't happen in NBA.
But the impression is, I was going to say, the impression is people still say it happens in football. People think that.
No, it used to happen many years ago in football, but you're talking about the 80s and the 90s. You're not talking about the 2000 era. And that's where football cleaned up. And, it has very rarely happened in my time. That's why when you talk about TEVEZ and Mascherano, we were very clear about it because we were like, what's wrong with us owning a percentage of these players, rights? We don't own the player, you own the contract.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Like, why can't you just be official about that? And, trainers often have a percentage and because they breed as well.
Yeah.
Bloodstock agents have percentage and a lot, they breed. Other owners have bits and pie and everywhere. So if you want to make the sport more widely attractive to the public, let them know. Okay, Ammo owns, Ammo bred that horse and they own 50% of that horse because they own and they are putting it to sale. Guess why? Because it's a business. We also have to sell.
Yeah.
I was just talking to you guys, there's a foal sale going on in Ireland and we were selling these horses and said, okay, right, this is our numbers. This is where our, this is where we're gonna value the horse at, and if it doesn't reach that, we buy it back. There is nothing wrong with that because that's where the value is to me. If I'm gonna sell let's say a Havana Grey foal and I put a price on her and say she's worth or he's worth 200,000, that is my
That's your valuation.
That's my valuation. Why? Because if I come back into the yearling sales next October, I'm probably going to be buying 500,000-600,000 worth of a Havana Grey yearling. So this is my price, and if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. There's nothing wrong with that. But I should know who owns what, and I think that part of it.
Do you think that transparency should extend to betting as well?
The betting is the worst part of it. I think the betting should be very, very clear. You don't have a situation where a football manager or an NBA manager or an NFL manager is betting on their own game or against themselves. You just don't have that. You're not allowed to. It's a criminal offense and you'd go to jail. Now, I know that in horse racing, it's not the same line, but I know trainers who bet. I know trainers who would have two horses in a race and bet on one, and
but which is
perfectly legal.
Perfectly legal.
So just to spell it out, jockeys can't bet.
Yep.
But anyone else that works at the yard can. I think anyone involved with the BHA can't. But otherwise,
you can't lay a horse.
Can't lay a horse. No, you can't bet against a horse, but you can bet on a horse to win. But in football, for example, who can't? Players, managers, anyone connected with the team in any way?
Anyway,
agents. Can't bet on football.
No. Nothing. Agents, nothing.
Nothing.
So what would you do then?
I never bet on football.
No, sorry. I mean, what would you do in racing? Just blanket ban anyone connected?
I think there's two. There's two ways of doing it, okay? I think if you want to allow that to happen, then, the general punter, the general guy who's, working, takes his lunch break, goes in to have a couple of bets in his local betting office and comes back out to go back to work. I think if a trainer is going to bet on a horse, whether it's via his mate or himself, that should be declared. The general punter should have that information.
Why are you giggling?
Yes.
Well, I just can't. I know that sounds.
It's not going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I know, but it's an unfair. It's an unfair gambling situation, because you're walking into a betting office and you don't have a clue if, I'm not going to mention a name, but if so-and-so has 2 horses in a race,
and they've punted.
One of them is 6-5 favorite, the other one is, 16-1. All of a sudden, during the course of the day, the 16-1 has got much shorter and the 6-5 has got a bit longer.
Yeah.
Unless you're following betting patterns and all of those things, which general punter doesn't do that. You walk into a betting office and you don't look at the general betting pattern and this is what's happened and this and that. You just make a bet on what you think is going to be right.
We've all been at the races when a horse has been backed off the boards, and we'll speak to a trainer or an owner and say, what's happened here? This horse has been punted from 33-1 to 7-4 favourite, and the first thing they tell you is, I don't know where that's come from. Now, I'm not saying that they always know where that's come from, but surely
they all know where it's come from.
All right.
They all know where it's come from. If someone tells you they don't know where it's come from, as an owner, you might not know where it's coming from because unless you are within the yard. Now, we have a very, I've had 2 full staff meetings in my yard, once when we first started the yard and once recently. And I just said, if anyone has, if we give information on a bet, or if we become something that, a bet is placed and a horse is shortened, everyone's sacked immediately. I don't care. I have no...
Do you mean that?
I absolutely mean that. That goes for my trainer as well. The first thing I spoke to Kevin about, the first thing I spoke to Robson about, the first thing with Adrian about, we are not going to become that. We're never, ever going to become that. That is just not going to be us. We're in the sport for longevity. We're in the sport to do something completely different. And if that happens, I don't care if he's won 3 Group 1s on the bounce. He'd just be gone. I'm not going to take any of that. A lot of the trainers that I have been with and I see, you can see betting patterns. I don't sit there looking at betting patterns, but I have a team that looks at patterns on our own horses. And if my horse suddenly shortens, I'm on the phone to the trainer and say, why has this shortened? And then if they tell me we don't know why that's shortened, which is 90% of the time they tell me, then I find a way to just leave that trainer in the long term.
Well, if they're watching this, they're not going to say, I've backed it.
Yeah.
But
to
if they
be
say
honest,
they've backed it, at least they're honest with me.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
different, right? Then I can tell anyone who asks me, yeah, my trainer likes it and he's backed it.
Right. You want a
so it's
transparency.
Transparency. I don't.
Okay.
It's
You
not
don't
a
mind if they
problem.
bet it. You just
No,
want to
you
be
can
told.
bet it, and you can say, I think this horse is going to absolutely bolt up.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Or you call him up and say, listen, I have another horse in the race which I think is better than yours.
Yeah.
Have transparency,
But for you, the game is, it transcends betting, right? It's not, for you, the game isn't betting, where there are lots of owners out there who with their team, or not on the scale that you are, obviously, part of it for them is going to be also backing their horses at the right time, because it costs a lot of money to have a horse in training. So that's going to be part of the fun for them. You accept that. For some people, that's going to be the game. It's just not yours.
Absolutely. For some people it is. But if you want to do it like that, which is fine, but then what I don't like to happen is to say, well, this horse has just gone out for a run. And listen, we have horses that can't hit their mark of 90, and they need to be dropped in a handicap. We're not in that business, but we do have horses like that happens, and they go out to run, and then they go, okay, this horse is never going to catch up with those. So the jockey just kind of just takes it easy. But that's not us going out there to do this on a week by week basis. The odd horses occur. Yes, of course they occur. Does that happen because the horse is just not good enough for the mark it's been given? But you have specific people in the game that just do that. And that's where the punters get affected.
Yeah.
And when the punters get affected, it doesn't help the sport.
But it sounds like, from hearing you speak about the ammo operation on the whole, and a couple of points there, that you see very much the big picture, not just for ammo and the long-term aims for ammo, but also making racing appeal to the masses. And all the things that you're saying there about the punters who ultimately come through the gates, come racing, etc. So what do you think racing can do more to appeal to as wide a of birth as possible.
More transparency.
That's it.
We have to be more
ultimately what we've
transparent.
been
Absolutely.
speaking about.
Why can't we have, for example, okay, trainers. Let's say you have a race today at Sandown, because we're here, and race 1, 6 trainers. Why can't 6 trainers give 6 opinions that is public? Say, yep, I think my horse is going to be blah, 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 or I think my horse is going to do, an honest opinion. And then let the punters decide what they think afterwards. Why is it that, they have to come and have a guess, but yet there is a secret information going around the yard or wherever that this horse is going to absolutely bolt up? None of it is illegal, what happens. And it's not illegal, and so it's legal, and so people obviously do it and can do it. I'm just saying you've got to make it more attractive, because the thing that we don't understand in sport, or that most people don't understand, is that sport belongs to the public. It doesn't belong to, when you own a sports team, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, it's your money that you've pumped into it, but it doesn't belong to you.
Do you think the people at the top of racing believe that the sport belongs to the public, or does it belong to the people at the top?
I don't know the people at the top of racing, because...
From your encounters of people that you've come across in the sport, do you feel there's an element that they understand that the sport belongs to the regular?
If you go to Royal Ascot, okay, and you are in any of those races, you got to realize one thing. If there's 50, 60,000 people, 40,000 people in that stadium that day, that sport belongs to those 40, 50,000 people that are there, and the hundreds of thousands of people that are watching. That is entertainment, right?
Yeah.
That is, we are providing an entertainment to them. We are doing it, and hopefully we can do it successfully enough to continue providing entertainment, right? When I go to an Arsenal game, I feel as it's my team. It's my team. It's the team that I've supported since I was 4 years old.
You might have a few players out there on your team.
And sometimes, if I'm watching Arsenal against PSG, I feel Arsenal's my team.
And you get that from football.
I don't own Arsenal, right?
No, but they're your team, and you have, when you're watching a game of football, you have, you might be watching, City, Liverpool, but you'll still have a side that you perhaps want to win because of how it affects their league, your Arsenal's league position in the table. So you will pick a side, whereas when you come racing as a fan, you perhaps don't organically already have a side. You haven't already picked a side, and you might get that through betting, but you otherwise, unless you're betting, it's hard. Your interest to an extent is slightly limited. Your interest might be away from what's happening on the track. It might be going and having a drink. It might be the day out that it can provide you, which I think the sport in this country is really cottoning on to now because of what they're witnessing elsewhere in what's happening in America with these new races they've got there, like the Pegasus and the Cali Crown, and what's going on in Australia. But go on.
I just want to sort of touch on that point, I guess, but it's with the transparency, with the fandom that you're talking about. I mean, when you have spent all the money, would you say there's an element of sort of cynicism about it?
100%.
Initially with Ammo, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but people have looked at it and go, well, I guess you touched it.
When your horse ran the other day, the full sibling to Alpinista ran and got beaten. You look on social media, I don't know whether you do or not, Kia, but when you look on social media...
I actually don't look at social media at all.
I mean, I probably shouldn't tell you, but I'm going to, because... But the reaction to that is, oh my God, ha, ha, ha,
There's
ha,
a bit of schadenfreude around it.
The fact that you spent that money and your horse has not shown a great deal of pride, ha, 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 look at them. There's an element of that. There are people out there that, there's a cynical side of the sport that want you to fail.
Yeah.
That must be quite, I mean, I'm not saying because you're sitting here next to it, but I think that must be quite discouraging.
But that's the thing. That's what I was going to say. Has anything happened, whether it's the cynicism from outside, whether it's the fact that you've tried to penetrate quite a antiquated, a kind of elitist sport? Have you ever thought, do you know what, lads? We've got a lot of money we could spend in here, but not for us.
Yeah.
Let's just skedaddle out of it.
Yeah. Well, see, but I'm in sport for all my life. All my adult life I've been in sport. So I can't shy away from something that is going to, be a social media event saying, haha, they failed. Okay. It might affect my kids more because they're younger. He's 15 and he reads social media, and he might get more affected by that. But I can't stop him from reading social media either. But for me, I've just recently discovered some Twitter and how to post on Twitter, because I never really was
well, this will be all over Twitter, by the way, so you'll be able to look back on it on Twitter.
So I'm never really a Twitter. I don't handle the Twitter account of Ammo either, so it saves me a lot of headache. But Alpinistas, Alpinara, our horse, she was very weak. She has not developed yet to that extent. She is miles away. If you look at the family, I think I don't want to make a mistake, but either her mother or grandmother only won at 4 and 5. Group ones
as well.
Yeah, at 4 and 5, and Sir Mark wanted to give her an experienced run. I think he was also hoping she would run better.
Yeah.
But when you looked at her around the ring and you saw her and you thought, oof, she looks weak and not ready yet. And she's gone on holiday. She was, you cannot determine her today. You can only determine her when she's 5.
But the point being that
she might outdo all of them.
If she had raced in Kirsten Rousing colours, she'd raced in the white and green hoops and not in the Ammo socks, there would be very little reaction to the fact that Alpinista's sister ran like that.
I think when the problem is that it's the number. I think like if anyone had paid, 2 million plus for a horse, and the horse gets, beaten by 10 lengths or 8 lengths, people will always criticize
There was that case with hydrogen. Do you remember the Qatar?
Yes.
It cost fortunes, and that got lapped on.
Yeah.
But there's more fascination.
When you talk about like,
there's
Green Monkey was one of those. Green Monkey.
Green Monkey, Snarky Dancer.
But there's more of a fascination, I think, with the narrative of the football agent who came into horse racing, spent big money. I think there's definite fascination.
But nowadays,
people enjoy it.
Send Frankie Dettori out to bat for you because he's
But
global ambassador.
The thing
is he going to be doing that?
Yeah, but the
representing
thing is,
you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that we are not about me anymore. I mean, it started about me. It started as, okay, Kia owns these horses, etc. We're now a big group. We have a huge team of people, and every one of those people is now involved. They all work there, from 5 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. These guys are all part of this team. The team has got bigger and stronger. David is a huge part of the team, and he's been he's extended now, and he'll probably be with us until God knows, when. Kevin's now part of the team. Robson's now part of the team. We have investors that are now part of the team. It's not about Kia anymore. And one of the reasons why, we brought Frankie in, and we think, well, first and foremost, because we'd spoken for a long time, and Frankie was quite getting a bit tired from racing, but he didn't know what he was going to do next. And I think he didn't want to take your jobs. So
he would have. If he wanted.
He would have taken your jobs, but he didn't want to take your jobs. He felt sorry for you guys.
Thanks, Frankie.
To be fair, my job's probably safe. It's you two. I'm all right.
It's a bit arrogant.
But and I think he wanted to be still a part of racing and something to do. And that happens a lot with, top professional athletes when they leave the sport. If you think about Cristiano, Messi, they extend their contracts and they extend their contracts. Well, they don't really need to work.
Yeah.
And they don't really need to extend their contracts in playing in the MLS or in the Saudi League. But they do it because they can't quite think about, what do I do tomorrow morning when I wake up? And Frankie's issue was that. And one of those issues was, what do I do tomorrow morning when I wake up? And because we've been friends for a long, long time, and we started speaking. And then before we actually pulled the trigger, I called the team and I said, guys, what do you guys all think? And everyone was like, yeah, this is a great idea. because really ammo is not anymore about, people still use the headline, Kia paid blah, 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 but it's not about Kia. It's not, it's about ammo, when they talk about Godolphin, they don't talk about Sheikh Mohammed did that. They talk about Godolphin did that. When they talk about Coolmore, they don't talk about MV did that, or Tabor did that, or Derek Smith did that. They talk about Coolmore having done that. And I think one of the things that we need to, as a company, that we need to transform and sort of put the image out that this is not just about me anymore. This is about ammo as a whole.
So very quickly, because we do have to wrap it up, you've got to get back to St John's Wood. In a word or in a sentence, where and what do you think ammo racing will be in 10 years' time then?
Where I hope it's going to be is competing at the very top and being one of the top teams in the world.
From breeding, from stallions, all the way to the racing.
Yeah, and the stallion part of it is a very important part of it because, we obviously now have Persian Force who's been extremely well liked and has been taken on. We have, Go Bears Go, King of Steel, obviously, and now we've retired Arizona, and we have Mojo. And I've been very clear. I've said all along, I look at the stallion list, who's bred against our stallions, and I want to support those people who are breeding against us, and I will continue to support them. And people that don't breed against us, I will be less likely to support going forward. So I am trying to balance that, going forward. And I do think that it's we have to get our breeding operation right. We're very, very far away from that. We have to get our, sorry, it's not one sentence, but
it's great. We have to keep it coming.
We have to get our racing in the right direction, which I think we are. We won several Group 1s this year, and I'd love to expand and compete further across the Atlantic. America is a place that we really want to get into. And when I say conquer, I don't mean to be the top, because you can't be. It's a very, very tough market. That's why the numbers are so much bigger in America. Stallion prices in America are enormous. 78 million for a stallion, or 80 million for a stallion, 100 million for a stallion. You talk about 20 million for a horse that hasn't been a stallion. The numbers are completely beyond where we are here. But I'd love to be able to break into that market and really sort of establish ourselves in America, because that's where really the market is. And I hope we can create something of a marketplace in the UK that can compete with the American market eventually.
Here, thank you very much. Now you're on X, you can like and subscribe at the Paddock UK. Hopefully everyone watching this will do the same. But we could have spoken for hours there, obviously. But really appreciate you stopping by.
No, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.